international space missions, and he only has 16 slides. You know, when he did his book doc about Moon Rush, I think there are 130. You know, so,
We didn't notice. It was awesome.
yeah, and then we have, and we are so honored to have Robert Zubrin here, who will be telling us about his book, The Case for Space, and he's written 9 other books. So you can buy this one here, and then go on Amazon, did you say that? And get the rest, the whole set. I'll tell you a few things a little later. Like one of the things we're looking at is maybe going to, if you want it, we haven't done a field trip in 5 years, but maybe to Denver Museum of Nature and Science. They have the Apollo 11 movie. How many people have seen that already? I know a few people have. Okay. And then they also have the Da Vinci exhibit. And Leonard and I got to be in there last week for about a half hour or so, and you really need a couple hours. But it's a beautiful exhibit, and I highly recommend it. So we, what? And they have a Mars rover?
Yes.
Oh, they're at the museum, not in the Da Vinci.
It's just another space feature.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And if you haven't been here before, there's bathrooms in the back. I think I see some wine up there if you want some. We have a few snacks. If you want coffee or whatever, we can make that. If it gets, you know, we all generate some heat, and we got the doors open. There's no real serious air conditioning here, but
It's outside.
You know, yeah, we won't turn the heat on this time anyway. Just want to mention that we are sponsored by the Coal Creek Canyon Park and Recreation, and they are having the Mountain Fest on August 3rd from 12 to 5, and then an after party at the Last Stand Tavern from 5 to 10. I think that's a first for our community. It's certainly without activity. Let's see. Yeah, we've got our website and then Facebook too, and Carolyn Collins Peterson updates that for us. And we're going to try to have some star parties probably at the Coal Creek Canyon K-8 school. They've got a great soccer field. You've heard me say this before. Some of you can bring a blanket, you can lay out there, look at the stars. We'll have telescopes. You can't have any alcohol on the soccer field because we don't want the soccer kids' feet getting stuck to the anyway. We can have it off to the side and we can have all of it.
Question.
Yeah.
Can they turn the lights off for us?
Yeah, no, I'm working on that. I am working on that this year. I've connected with both the principal and the custodian there, and we're trying to work out a way that they can totally have their lights out. Because it does have...
How good's your BB?
What was that?
How good's your BB aim?
Oh, well, he's got, well, no, not BBs, we don't do that, but he's got a power thing, you know, a light laser thing.
Turn it off.
So, we asked for a donation of $5. If there's a problem with that, we want people to just come. Kids are for free. We will do a group photo at the end of this, you know, just all come up here. So let me let Leonard go, and then
Oh, you didn't want to
just
hand
quick.
out those?
It's got to be quick because.
Okay, I'm going to be quick. Lots going on.
Okay.
Good. We're done?
You got? Yeah.
Okay. This is curiosity on Mars. I mean, I just downloaded this yesterday. And, you know, this thing landed NASA. Curiosity rover. Okay. We're on Mars. We've been there since August of 2012. We've gone all of 13 miles since this thing was landed. But the visuals are pretty cool.
That's a good shot of the RTG on the back.
Yep, it's pretty cool. Exactly. This is an RTG powered
Radioactive thermal generator.
right, and this is liquid powered rover, and here's some, look at this, keep an eye on this. Keep an eye on that, because this is what that damn thing does. It takes really cool photos up close of different types of, kind of geological activity on Mars. So anyway, it's doing a great job. It's been there since August of 2012. It just passed 13 miles. We get humans on Mars. My guess is by that time we would have gone way past that. But anyway, that's my gripe. This just happened a couple days ago. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO from NASA, actually photographed the rover on Mars, and there it is. Pretty cool. That's where it is. Lots more.
So which one? Oh, this is Curiosity.
This is Curiosity.
Ah, okay.
Okay. Keep track tomorrow. Cool thing happened. India launching a probe to the moon. They've done an earlier orbiter for the moon, but this time it's a lander. And here's the vehicle as it's stacked on the pad as a couple days ago. This is their own indigenous launch vehicles. They're ready to go to the moon tomorrow. Stand by. Oh, I gotta tell you what time. This is where I put the notes together. 3:21 Mountain Time.
AM?
PM?
3:21
PM or AM?
PM.
PM.
They're gonna try this. So keep an eye on this. This is where they're going.
Oh.
For the south pole side of the moon. Okay.
Find some water.
The launch
This
is
is their
tomorrow?
lander.
Yes.
This is what they built.
Wow.
They have a rover,
They got a rover
and a lander. And if they're successful, in September of this year, they'll land. Takes a while for them to get to the moon, but takes up tomorrow. And if they're successful, this is their attempt at doing lunar exploration. The big cool story, in my view, was Japan. The Hayabusa 2 is an insane mission. They have launched robots on the asteroid. They have deployed so much stuff. And just a few days ago, they landed on the asteroid one more time to pick up a sample of a place that they created an impact crater. They've actually put an explosive down there and actually blew up part of the asteroid. And they went back down in there and, sucked up, looks like they were successful, they sucked up more material from the asteroid. This is a before and after picture. This is as they touched down on the moon, on the asteroid, just a few day or so ago, and all the material was kicked up. But they think they've got a sample of this fresh crater that they made. Pretty cool. And they're very excited. This is a group picture of people that made a difference in space exploration. Japan. Okay, there we are. It's just a little sideshow. Here's our
4th of
exhibit.
July.
Thanks to John
Do you want to say a
and
few words?
Scott.
John?
We did it pretty good on July 4th.
I still have a lot of stickers and bookmarks, and they're all over there.
Okay. We made a dent in our July 4th show. Here we are. We won the best looking group. With a dog. Because there's always these other things, you know. Yeah. Best looking group with a dog or without a dog. Okay. And I just want to highlight something that's very important here. You know, we have had in the past a couple of speakers that talked about their involvement in Ball Aerospace. Mr. Osborne, is he here?
I don't think you.
No, he's not here.
Rob Osborne.
Rob worked on this mission. It finally got off the launch pad. It's in orbit. It's doing a green propellant mission. This is a new kind of propellant technology that they're trying out. But Ball Aerospace was very familiar with. And then, on top of that, we've got Bob Grimm just won a major award for a lunar science experiment to go to the moon. Bob Grimm.
He's one of our scholars.
He's one of our sky watchers, and so I want to salute those, even though they're not here, they don't care.
No, and they will give talks in the future.
And we've got them on tap doing an explanation of what, you know, not only the green propellant mission, but this moon mission. So that's pretty much it for me. I'm trying to get on.
Can I throw one other in?
Yeah.
They did a successful abort test for Orion.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Last
we
week.
didn't have that.
I didn't put that in there.
Yeah.
I should.
We should have, we watched it.
Thank you for that. And describe that though.
So Orion is like the Apollo capsule on steroids. It holds 4 astronauts, and they're in the process of finishing up the design of it now down at Lockheed Martin. And it's got a rocket on top of it that will get them out of trouble if the rocket below them has some kind of trouble. So they have this abort system that shoots them away at very high velocity. And it's a new development, and they just had their second test last week on this, and everything went successful.
Yeah.
So they launched it up on a rocket, and then they pretended they were going to have some trouble with the rocket, and they punched the button, and this thing just took right off and got them out of there.
So this is NASA, Lockheed Martin, working together, a lot of contractors. And Rob Zubrin Bob will talk about where we're going from there. And hats off to those guys. A lot of technology, a lot of work. And you know, we're at the sort of the anniversary of Apollo.
50th.
50th anniversary
Today
of Apollo.
lifting off to go to the moon.
Yeah, and you know, there's something else going on in the space program that we're going to keep an eye on. And so the anniversaries are great. It's nice to look ahead 50 years, and this particular test you're talking about is on the pathway of something new. So I think that's it, and I think I'm leaving this with Barb
Yeah.
because we're talking. Dr. Zubrin has been one of the more influential people to actually create places on the Earth that we can do simulations. This is Devon Island near the Arctic Circle. This is in Utah.
And, I don't know, Robert, do you want to say a few words about it?
Let's
'Cause I
let
don't know
Robert
if it's
come
your
up
talk.
and do his talk.
Yeah.
But you know, Robert's been one of the more influential people to be on the forefront of the future. I don't agree with him on everything. But
I don't agree with him on everything.
yeah, I know. And he's my best friend from decades past.
30 years.
And Robert's done some incredible work to make sure the future happens today.
Words. He's written, well, I told you he's written 9 books, and we have his Facebook space in the back, and he's giving us $5 discount, so it's only $5. And can we take credit cards too?
We can take credit cards, we can take PayPal, and we can take cash. And here,
Checks?
take checks.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
How
No
about
slogans.
barters?
What?
Do you have barter? You
No.
know, we're into bartering here. And you used to live in a.
Indian Hills.
Indian Hills, so he used to live on the other side, so even though he's down in Denver area, Golden area, now, you know, he's a mountain guide too. And, he's the president of Pioneer Astronautics, and also the president of the Mars Society, which, you know, Leonard was showing you some of those images, and I don't want to take too long, but I just want to say, you know, we have known him for about 30 years, and when he first got this together with the Mars Society to do these analog sites in Utah and the Arctic, I was just fascinated by this, and I followed it with every team he had there, what their reports were, what they were doing. They go out on excursions, okay? And what we may have at our next meeting or one of the future meetings is Dewey Anderson, who developed some of the spacesuits.
He developed those first generation spacesuits
Spacesuits.
that were in the
That
picture 2 slides ago.
Yeah, and worked on the Habitat too, apparently.
Yes.
Yeah. So I could go on and on, because he's such a wonderful guy, but I'll let him go.
All right, thank you. Talk. I'm going to talk about the thesis that's in my new book, The Case for Space, which was just published in May, so it's only been out for 2 months. Yeah, so after the talk, you got them here, they're discounted, you buy them, I'll sign them, it's a win-win situation. Okay, so now the subtitle of the book is How the Revolution in Spaceflight Opens Up a Future of Limitless Possibility. When I talk about the revolution, I'm going to talk about the limitless possibility. And I'm going to talk about something else, which is why this is really important. So, there's a revolution. Okay. This you're looking at here, this is February 2018. First flight of Falcon Heavy. Now, you should understand the significance of this. I mean, everybody saw this is really cool. Here they come, they're landing and everything together. Nothing like it in the world. But you should know, 2010, President Obama had a Blue Ribbon Commission formed, headed by the former CEO of Lockheed Martin, Norm Augustine, to examine the feasibility of implementing the Bush administration's moon program. And they concluded that that program was infeasible within available finances because, according to them, it would take 12 years and $36 billion to develop a heavy lift launch vehicle to implement it. Okay. So, answer. SpaceX did it in 6 years for less than $1 billion, and the vehicle is 3/4 reusable. Okay. So, and what SpaceX has done more broadly is shown that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that had previously been thought that only the governments of major powers could do, and do it in 1/3 of the time or less, at 1/10 the cost or less than had been considered normative. And not only that, even do things that they had considered not feasible at all. Okay, reusable launch vehicles coming back, okay, landing instead of just crashing into the ocean or just parachuting into the ocean, okay, or something of that sort. Okay, and because of this, not only have they created some very useful pieces of flight hardware, okay, they have created a space race, an entrepreneurial space race. There's emulators getting in, okay. First, people more or less of his general type, Musk's general type, like Bezos and Branson with the Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, but even working engineers getting investors. So here's Rocket Lab, okay, founded by some working engineers, people, middle-class means, but who got $300 million of investment, and they have now repeatedly reached orbit, okay? And this is a New Zealand company. New Zealand doesn't even have a space agency. okay? New Zealanders have made it to space. So this entrepreneurial space revolution is not only making space cheap, it is making it possible for people of any nation, not just those who have substantial space programs, in order to take part. Okay? Previously, if you were from New Zealand and if you wanted to be part of the space program, you had to move to the United States or at least Canada. Okay, but now, there it is. Okay, and people are getting into this from lots of places. In March, I witnessed myself an entrepreneurial space launch in China. Okay, and it was a reusable vehicle. It took off, it hovered about 100 feet in the air for 30 seconds, and then it returned to the launch pad and landed right at the center of the pad. And I believe this team, it is called Link Space, probably reach orbit with a reusable launch vehicle within 2 years. And another observer of the launch was the CTO of Alibaba, which is like Amazon in China. So that's where they're getting their money, okay? And there it is. So this is happening. And look, in the first 12 years of the space program, from 1957 to the moon landing in '69, space technology raced ahead, both developed by NASA and the Soviets. We developed multi-stage heavy-lift launch vehicles, hydrogen-oxygen engines, in-space life support, spacesuits, orbital rendezvous techniques, orbital re-entry techniques, soft landing techniques, lunar rovers, radioisotope power sources, deep space network, deep space communication, deep space navigation, etc. We sent probes to Mars, to Venus, and even we're just about ready to launch Pioneer on Jupiter. The whole bag of tricks, okay? But from 1970 to 2010, while these capabilities continued to be exercised, in particular with more accomplishments in the realm of robotic space exploration and space astronomy, in terms of human spaceflight, it did not progress at all from 1969 to 2010. In fact, it retreated from the moon to low Earth orbit, and more importantly, launch vehicle technology did not progress. The cost of space launch did not drop at all from 1970 to 2010. But since 2010, it has dropped by a factor of 5. And that's the work of SpaceX. And they are now aggressively pushing to drop it by another factor of 3, because that's what Starship will do compared to the Falcon Heavy. Okay? So we've gone from $10,000 a kilogram to $2,000 a kilogram, okay, available now, and they're pushing for $700 a kilogram. Okay, so this is extraordinary. And because there's emulators, the pressure is going to be on to keep doing it. I mean, so this is a very good thing. Now, last year there were about 100 satellite launches in the whole world. SpaceX got 24 of them, which is remarkable, especially given the fact that about 50 of them were Russian and Chinese and not available for competition. So of the available launches, they got half. Okay, and that's incredible. But here's, though, 100 launches a year is really not very much. But because the cost of launch is coming down, the number of launches is going to go up. Okay, now that's simple economics, supply and demand. You make something cheaper, more people will buy it. Okay, fine. Okay, so maybe now we go to 200 launches a year. That gives you a greater volume, and it allows you to cheapen space launch more. So 300 launches a year. You get a virtuous cycle here. But something else happens. As you increase the number of launches, the spacecraft themselves become cheaper because they can be produced in larger volumes, and all the different technological elements that go into them can be produced in larger volumes, larger market for the industry. Okay? And they also become more advanced, because the cheaper the launch, the less conservative spacecraft designers need to be. Okay? For the past half century, okay, the wisdom among spacecraft designers was don't use things that haven't been used before unless you absolutely have to. Don't do something that promises to be somewhat better when you've got something that's good enough. Good enough is good enough. We don't want to use technologies that haven't been used before. It's like people don't want to go to see movies they haven't seen before because you don't want to go see a bad movie. So when you go, Casablanca, Song of the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, and forget the rest. You know, so it's interesting. All three of those movies would be 103 years from each other. But anyway, a good 3 years. So spacecraft will advance, and in fact they have been advancing for reasons outside of the space program, namely the revolutions in electronics that have been going on. So there's a second revolution in play, which is the microsatellite revolution. It's not as spectacular, it's not as much of a show horse, but this is happening. Okay, these CubeSats, which started out as just little educational projects, have now become capable spacecraft. And in fact, especially when you put them together in not just one little cube, but maybe 6, you get what they call a 6U CubeSat. 2 of those were flown to Mars last year, alongside in convoying with InSight, and were able to relay its telemetry of its entry, descent, and landing. Now, these little 10-kilogram CubeSats doing things that previously it took a 500-kilogram or 1,000-kilogram satellite to do. And furthermore, you know what they cost? It's like $2 million. Yeah, versus hundreds of millions of dollars. So now it's going to be possible not only for major governments or minor governments or Fortune 500 companies, but even medium and small-ish businesses to send their own satellites into space. Okay, so this is another thing. And then finally, there's another development which NASA is largely responsible for, which is the increased knowledge of space, which is the identification of resources on other worlds and the development of technologies to exploit them. The discovery of water and permanently shallow craters on the moon, the discovery of vast amounts of pure water ice on Mars at mid-latitudes. We have now discovered from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter glaciers on Mars as far south as 38 degrees north, which is the latitude of San Francisco, south of here. Okay, more water in those than in the American Great Lakes. Okay, and with water and carbon dioxide, which we've also discovered on Mars, is spiking, you can make methane and oxygen propellant, you can grow plants, grow food, you make plastics, make fibers, and apply to what we always knew was on Mars, iron oxide, you can make steel and other very useful things. So, so you've got 3 new capabilities. Most spectacular, the revolution in space launch, the revolution in spacecraft, which is going to be accelerated by the revolution in space launch, and the discovery of resources, which will also be accelerated by being able to fly more missions. Now, if we really want to open up the space age, what about trying to make space travel as cheap as air travel? Okay, because $700 a kilogram, okay, that's a lot better than it was in 2010 at $10,000 a kilogram. But, you know, let's say you're going to take yourself and your baggage 100 kilograms on an airplane flight and charge $500. That's $5 a kilogram. How do we get to those kinds of prices? $5 a kilogram, $10. Okay. You need a bigger market than you could even get from expanding the satellite launch market. Okay. Because, I mean, let me put it this way. SpaceX last year had 24 launches. And they had to charge on the order of $60, $70 million each for those launches in order to meet payroll of a relatively small company. And you say, well, what if I wanted to drop the price of those launches by a factor of 100? And if somehow I could do those launches without having to spend any more money on personnel or fuel or anything, and that of course is not true, because if you need 100 launches, you have to have more people and more. But you wouldn't need 100 people. Okay. But even that, taking those extremely optimistic assumptions, you would need to have 100 times as many flights just to have the same revenue, right? So how do we increase the number of flights from 100 a year, not to 200 or 300, but 10,000? Okay. Well, that's not in the satellite market. But there's another market that would support this, and that's intercontinental transportation. And the way I think about it is this, is for the past 3,000 years, people have made money on the ocean. And they've done it in two ways. Some people have made money by trying to extract wealth from the ocean, for example, by fishing. And that's been a substantial business for 3,000 years. But far more money has been in play by using the oceans as a low-drag medium of transportation. The oceans are a low-drag medium connecting every port to every port, and that's been a much, much, much bigger business and a much more important business than fishing since the dawn of civilization. Well, space is a zero-drag medium connecting every point on Earth to every other point. Okay? And in fact, by flying through space, you can get from anywhere to anywhere on Earth in less than an hour. Okay? Now, there's a variety of challenges to implementing such a business. Okay, initially, the takeoff ports will have to be ports, a little bit out to sea, but you're going Los Angeles to Sydney in less than an hour. Now, obviously, this was an unthinkable kind of activity for using expendable launch vehicles, unless you're sending nuclear bombs from them, so people have thought of it, and that business has been around since the 50s, but in terms of sending passengers, expendable launch vehicles won't cut it. You have to have reusable launch vehicles. And if you're using a reusable launch vehicle like the Starship, it would actually do it. Okay, you would have the first stage take off, return to its initial landing site, the other stage flies across the Earth and it lands near the destination city. And when it's time to fly back, they have another reusable first stage operating there to do that part of it. Okay, now, it is interesting that, Musk for Starship and Bezos for Blue Origin have both selected methane-oxygen as their propellant combination. Now, methane-oxygen has a particular significance for Musk because it is the propellant you can most easily make on Mars. So if you do want to fly back direct from the surface of Mars, as I proposed in Mars Direct, and he proposes to do with his Starship mission architecture, that is the propellant to use. And more generally, it's a pretty attractive propellant combination in terms of a number of its engineering features. But there's another thing about methane-oxygen. It's the cheapest propellant combination. Liquefied natural gas is about a factor of 5 cheaper than jet fuel. Okay, it's about a factor of 3 cheaper than gasoline. Okay, it's the cheapest fuel. Now, if you're using expendable launch vehicles, it really doesn't matter if your fuel costs $1 a gallon or $100 a gallon, because the hardware you're throwing away is much more costly. But if you use reusable launch vehicles, just like airplanes, fuel costs matter. Okay, and I actually worked the numbers on using Starship as a long-distance travel technology. And what you're talking about in terms of fuel costs of going from anywhere to anywhere is a few $100,000 a flight. And if you've got 100 passengers and if the flight is going to cost like 5 times as much as the fuel, the numbers worked out to like $20,000 a seat. Now, $20,000 for an airplane trip is more than I usually pay. It's more than I've ever paid. But in fact, it is the cost today of the first class ticket from Los Angeles to Sydney. There are people who actually pay that. And all they get for their money is a bigger chair, a tablecloth, and a free drink. Okay, they still have to spend 18 hours in the airplane just like the rest of us. Now here you're talking about a service which would get you there in less than an hour, and in which you get half an hour of zero gravity and seeing the black starry skies face out the window. Okay, so I think this is viable. And when this happens, okay, initially, okay, well-heeled or business travelers and so forth be the first to go, but as it goes, it will become cheaper as well. But furthermore, vehicles of this character are basically orbital vehicles. So let's say you wanted to do, you didn't really care about getting to Sydney, you just wanted to enjoy space. So you put it in orbit, you do 3 or 4 orbits, you spend, 5 hours in space, and then you come back down. You pay for that. That certainly beats the up and down joyride on the Virgin Galactic thing. I'm not actually a believer in that. But this would be 1/10 the price and more than 10 times the trip. Well, it wouldn't make sense to send a rocket vehicle in space for a week that could be making money by flying every day. But now you get to your space hotels. You know, Bigelow started a space hotel company back in the 90s, and it didn't really make much sense in the context of 1990s launch vehicles. He was actually hoping that the Venture Star, the X-33 reusable launch vehicle, would materialize. It never did. But now something is materializing, and at that point, once you have this, then the space hotels start to make sense. Okay, now, this entrepreneurial space revolution can enable space exploration as well. Now, there's 2 parts, well, more than 2 parts, but NASA has 2 different modes of operation. There's what I call the mission-driven mode or purpose-driven mode, and there's the vendor-driven mode. Okay? And this is why some NASA programs achieve epic accomplishments and others are essentially scandals of waste. Okay? Apollo was mission-driven. The science program, that is like the planetary rovers, the orbiters going to Saturn, the space telescopes, okay, they are overall mission-driven. The human spaceflight program post-Apollo, however, has not been mission-driven. It's been vendor-driven. The difference is, in a mission-driven program, you spend money to do things. In a vendor-driven program, you do things to spend money. Okay? So, for example, while some of the space shuttle missions had clear purposes, launch, repair, upgrade the whole space telescope, okay, that's great. A lot of the shuttle missions were done just to have an excuse to fly the shuttle. Okay, in fact, unfortunately, a lot of pajamas did. Okay, which is why the cost of that program overall is not commensurate with what could have been done with an equal amount of money spent on robotic missions. Now, if they were just flying robotic missions in order to fly robots to nowhere, well, then they wouldn't be particularly cost effective. Okay. But look, the part of the space program that is mission-driven, that is purpose-driven, science program, has taken advantage of this. For instance, last year, the Test Space Telescope, which is a planet-finding telescope, was launched into space on a Falcon 9. Okay? $65 million launch vehicle. And the science director chose it in preference to a Delta IV, which also could have done the mission, at a cost of $200 million. Said, well, that's an easy decision to make. If they do the same thing and one costs $140 million less than the other, I think I'll choose that one. Okay, especially since by that time Falcon 9 had been proven to be quite reliable. Okay. However, so there's an extra $140 million that can be used to build more space telescopes or whatever it is. Okay. Human spaceflight program right now does not have that same attitude. Okay, they're talking, okay, Trump administration wants to send people to the moon by 2024. Now, one could argue about whether the moon is the proper objective. I actually believe that Mars is the right objective for moon explorers. But let's just stipulate that it is. Okay? Wouldn't you want to use the launch vehicles that are available now instead of launch vehicles that don't exist? Especially if the launch vehicles that are available now, such as the Falcon 9, well, Falcon 9 is available, but more importantly, Falcon Heavy is available, that has 2/3 the launch capability of the SLS, which is not available and which costs 10 times as much. Okay, so the Trump administration is actually presented with a conundrum now, because NASA has designed a moon program which is designed to maximize the use of the SLS. First of all, it requires building a space station in lunar orbit before they even go to the moon, which will require 4 SLS launches, and the SLS can only be launched once every year, and the program costs $2 billion a year to run, so that's $8 billion to build a space station in lunar orbit, which is actually not needed to go to the moon. Okay. And then the lunar missions that they have following it require 2 SLSs per mission, which by the way is going to be tricky because of the slow launch rate. But in any case, they've designed a program to maximize the market for SLSs instead of to maximize the exploration activity on the moon. Now, if you take advantage of the lunar water to make return propellant, okay, you only need heavy lift launch vehicles at the beginning of the program when you don't yet have that operational. And after that, as I show, I'm not going to explain it all here because it's a talk in itself, but it's in the book. I explain a mission architecture that I call Moon Director, which uses Falcon Heavies to get the thing started, and then once you have the propellant making available on the moon, the program can be sustained with Falcon 9s. And the point here is, yes, take advantage of lunar materials, turn them into resources to cheapen the program, but also, let's say you said, I need a heavier capability than Falcon 9, even though it's so much more expensive, I'll use SLSs for these launches. Fine, you should still design the architecture to free yourself from that necessity as early as you can, because the purpose of the lunar program is not to provide business for SLS vendors. The purpose of SLS would be, if it is needed for certain things for the lunar program, use it for that. It's like running any other business. Whatever your vendors can supply you, the purpose of your business is not to give money to your vendors. The purpose of your vendors is to give you things that you need, okay? And you don't want to give them more money than what is required for that. And so the best lunar architecture, even if you had to use SLS, would be one that freed itself of that need as soon as possible, so the SLSs could be redeployed to send payloads to Mars. Or in this case, Falcon Heavies redeployed for that purpose. Okay? So the analogy I use is like Normandy Beach. To take Normandy Beach, you have to send your very best combat divisions. But once you've taken it, it can be run by rear echelon units, and your best combat divisions can be redeployed to liberate the rest of France. So you don't try to create trench warfare in Normandy in order to give those divisions something to do. So that's here. But the larger point is this. We want this entrepreneurial space revolution. We want to take advantage of it. By taking advantage of it, we can do more things in space. By utilizing it, we drive it forward. Okay? So instead of saying, well, we have these contracts in place and we want to keep these vendors happy and so we're going to keep spending money on this or that, you say, we want a payload capability of delivering 20 tons at a time to the surface of Mars. Who's willing to do it? What's your price? Okay? Do it that way. So, and then Mars, okay. Right now, NASA has no real plan to go to Mars. They, in order to put some sales appeal on the Lunar Orbit Gateway, they've created a mission architecture that involves creating an interplanetary spaceship called the Deep Space Transport, which would be based at the Lunar Orbit Gateway. And it's all very futuristic. But you don't need giant interplanetary spaceships to go send people to Mars, and you don't need lunar orbit space stations to go to Mars, and you certainly don't need giant interplanetary spaceships based at lunar orbit and space stations to go to Mars. Okay, what you do need is the capability of sending large payloads to Mars. Okay, SLS, if you want to know, I was actually on the team at Martin Marietta that designed the preliminary design of what is now called SLS in 1988, 31 years ago. And we did not think of it as it being the ultimate launch vehicle, the greatest launch, nothing of the sort. We said this was the simplest launch vehicle to develop because it's just a shuttle stack without the orbiter. Okay? And it was designed to throw payloads on trans-Mars injection. Okay? Now, it could be used for that purpose. Or one could simply put an upper stage or lift to orbit an upper stage in the SpaceX Starship. Okay. You know, Musk talks about having these, this is a fully reusable Earth orbit system, this is the upper stage, which he proposes to refuel on orbit, fly it to Mars, refuel it on Mars, and fly it back. I would not use it that way at all. For one thing, that would put this thing out of action for 3 years flying to Mars and back. It would take a very large propellant-making capability on Mars to produce enough fuel to fly it back. But rather, the way I would use it is just as a reusable Earth-to-orbit system. And once it got to orbit, an upper stage would send the required payloads to Mars, which are considerably smaller than the Starship. Okay. A small Earth return vehicle, which indeed does make its return propellant on Mars to come back, but an order of magnitude less than required for Starship, and then once that's done, a habitat spacecraft with the astronauts in it. They go, they land, they explore, and come back and this. Okay. But here's the light in the tunnel that I see. As I say, NASA currently does not have a Humans to Mars program. They have this visionary application of the Deep Space Gateway, but that is simply to sell the Deep Space Gateway. However, okay, SpaceX is talking like they'll have Starship flying in 2021 to Earth orbit. I think that's improbable. I do think, though, that it is quite probable they will have Starship flying from Earth to orbit by 2024. And if that is a reality, if Starship flying to orbit is reality by 2024, it's 5 years from now, I think that's a very realistic target. Somebody's going to be elected president in 2024. And if Starship is flying to Earth orbit in 2024, and he or she asks their advisors, could we have humans on Mars by the end of my second term? The answer to the question is going to be yes. Okay. And if they say, well, is it going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars like some people say? No. Is it going to cost tens of billions of dollars? Well, it might cost about $10 billion. We could do this by the end of my second term? Yeah. Possibly by the end of your first. Let's do it. So in other words, it's the entrepreneurial space revolution is going to make humans to Mars sellable to the political class by making it feasible. Make it feasible, makes it so. So, I talk in the book a lot about then how we can go to the moon, how we can go to Mars, how we can settle Mars, how we can start mining asteroids, and then the outer solar system. And then I also talk about, in conjunction with that, parallel technological revolutions that have been ignited as a result of the spaceflight revolution. Okay, because this thing has had effects outside of the space sector, particularly in the area of fusion power, which may not be an area that most people here follow, but fusion power is one of these things that, yes, we all envisioned we're going to have fusion power, but then we kept on getting the story, well, it's going to be in 30 years, it's going to be in 30 years, and so people developed an attitude towards it like they had towards reusable space launch vehicles, which is, yeah, sure, someday, let me know, okay? But what happened was, as a result of the space launch revolution, a number of people had started looking at fusion power and saying, wait a second, maybe the problem here is really the same problem as was the case with reusable space launch. Maybe the fundamental problem was not technical but institutional. Maybe the wrong kind of organization was doing it. And so entrepreneurial fusion power companies have now gone funded, and when I mean funded, I mean seriously funded. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Try Alpha Energy in California, $500 million in investment. That's more than the US fusion budget, okay? And they're moving at a totally different kind of pace. And you know, I actually worked a little bit in the fusion program myself in the 80s at Los Alamos, and I can remember one lunch we had, and our group leader told us, you know, when fusion power is finally developed, it's not going to be a place like Los Alamos in Livermore. It's going to be a couple of crackpots working in a garage. And we all laughed, because fusion's pretty hard, and a couple of crackpots in a garage, no. And I think, even today, that remark was a bit over much. But if not a couple of crackpots in a garage, a startup working in a warehouse, yes. That's what I think is going to do. And the significance of that, by the way, is, yes, fusion power is important. You use infinite resources, never run out, there's no greenhouse gases, very little radioactive waste. That's all great stuff, you can make electricity. But it's more significant than that. Because if it was just another way to make electricity, you say, okay, you're going to make it a little cheaper than the other way. Okay, that's nice to hear. But it doesn't shape your world, right? But the thing is, fusion power is a different kind of energy technology. It can do things you can't do with natural gas turbines or solar panels or windmills. Okay? For instance, you can make fusion rockets. And a fusion rocket can have an exhaust velocity up to 7% the speed of light. And it is generally possible to engineer a rocket to achieve a velocity up to about twice its exhaust velocity. So you're talking about creating systems that can get over 10% the speed of light. That gives you a marginal capability for interstellar travel. Now, the ideal fuel for a fusion reactor, especially if you're using it as a fusion rocket, is deuterium, which is widely available, and helium-3, which is not available on Earth at all. It is available in some quantities on the Moon, and it's available in vast quantities in the atmospheres of the outer planets. Now, mining Jupiter's atmosphere is really hard. The gravity is too much. But getting in and out of the atmospheres of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune is an engineering possibility. You can do it. To mine those atmospheres for helium-3 and bring it back. And I think that would be one of the main reasons to develop the outer solar system. But in any case, ultimately, this is where this revolution is taking us. It's taking us to the stars. Now, the first 2/3 of the book talk about all this stuff that I've just talked about. And how the revolution will open up orbit, the Moon, Mars, etc. Okay, the last third is the why. Okay, and I give a number of reasons. For the knowledge, for our survival, for the challenge, for our freedom, and for the future. And some of this is stuff that people here are familiar with. For the knowledge, space is the best place to do astronomy, by far. Okay? And astronomy is where we've made most of our discoveries in physics. Classical physics, gravitation, a lot of electromagnetism, relativity, nuclear fusion, they were all discovered through astronomy, because the universe is a lab beyond what we can do. Okay? I think we will make major discoveries in biology by going into space. Okay? Because we're going to discover if life as we know it on Earth is what life is, or if it's just one particular design for life. See, all Earth life has the same basic design. It uses DNA, RNA, the same genetic alphabet. Okay, you know, it's just different words spelled with the same alphabet. Okay, but as we know, while there are some other alphabets on Earth that are almost the same as ours, like the French or Spanish alphabets, German alphabet, there are others that are completely different and operate on a totally different principle of operation, okay, like Chinese, for example. And now they all do the same thing, which is convey words on paper, but they do it in very different ways. Remake a planet. Well, that's what life is. Life is self-replicating nanomachines. Okay? That's why it's so powerful. That's why it's completely remade this planet. And if you could program it, you could remake other planets. But the thing is, we only know about one way to make these machines right now. There could be many other ways to make them, and having a variety of approaches could give you enormous capabilities. So what I'm talking about is that there's enormous discoveries to be made in space. And in biology, and I think in physics, I think we've only read the first chapter of the book of physics of the universe. We do not understand innumerable things. We don't understand why there is charge, why there is mass, why doesn't charges like electrons blow themselves to pieces, because they should since they're self-repelling, you know, why the laws of the universe are what they are. So we really don't understand a lot yet about physics, and of course when you do learn things about physics, you gain new powers over nature. So, okay. So, and by the way, this is Sarah Seeger here presenting the final conclusion of the Kepler mission. 1 in 5 stars harbors an Earth-sized planet in its habitable zone. For our survival, okay, everybody knows how all these asteroids hitting the Earth causing mass extinctions. Well, wasn't that like 65 million years ago? Okay. Well, actually, last December 18th, a meteor hit the Bering Sea with an energy equal to 10 times the Hiroshima bomb. Seven months ago. Okay. This is happening because, you know, space is filled with things that are flying around and occasionally hit each other, including the Earth. The Earth is in space, okay? So it is flying around and it's hitting or being hit by, how do you want to put it, other things, and it happens all the time. And by becoming spacefaring, we gain the capability to gain control of this traffic. I have no sympathy at all for the argument that we need to go into space so that when the Earth is hit by an asteroid, there'll be survivors somewhere else. Okay, that's, to me, an absurd argument. Okay, we're not going into space to desert the Earth. We're going into space to protect the Earth. Okay. And that is a very legitimate reason. Challenge. believe that civilizations, like individuals, grow and challenge ourselves. We stagnate when we don't. A bold space program would be an invitation to adventure to every young person. Learn your science, and you could be an explorer of new worlds. We actually saw this effect in the 1960s. Here's Apollo, and the number of science graduates doubled in the United States. In fact, they tripled in higher education, and it because youth loves adventure. A bold space program makes science the great adventure. And we've benefited from that ever since. The key, and people ask, what do we get for the moon program? Okay, Teflon. Okay, well, what you got was millions of scientists, engineers, doctors, medical researchers, technological entrepreneurs, inventors, you know, and I mean, I myself am one of that cohort. Okay, most of my peers who were making robots and rocket fuel in the basement in the 1960s went off and they built Silicon Valley. And that's why they're a lot richer than me. I actually ended up doing space. But but I had more fun. Anyway, the point is that the real the development of intellectual capital is tremendous benefit. And if we did this today, the impact would be much greater. As we had like a Humans to Mars program today, because for instance, in the 1960s, all those little mad scientists making rocket fuel in the basement were boys. Virtually without exception. Okay, but today science and engineering is open to girls in a way that simply was not the case in the 1960s. And so you also get a lot of little girl man scientists too. Frighteningly good. And then now here's another thing that people don't talk about very much. There's a point, but I think it's very important. How we think about the future, even the far future, affects what's going to happen now and in the near future. Okay. And if you think about it, what is the greatest threat facing humanity today? Some people would say it's climate change. Some people would say it's resource exhaustion. Some people would say it's asteroid impact. I don't think it's any of those things. I think the greatest threat to humanity today is the same thing that caused the greatest disasters in the 20th century, which is bad ideas. And in particular, one bad idea. The very same bad idea that caused all the worst catastrophes in the 20th century. And that idea is there isn't enough to go around. Okay? Because if you accept that idea, then we're all enemies. We're all enemies. And the only question is, when do we have it out? Okay? So, for instance, 1912, General Friedrich von Bernhardi, chief intellectual of the German General Staff, writes an international bestseller in English. It's called Germany and the Next War. We should talk about, we're running out of everything. Germany's going to have it out with Russia. Should we do this sooner or later? Well, clearly sooner before they industrialize. So, 1914, Europe tears itself to pieces, fighting over a non-existent resource shortage. Even though Europe was, and the world in general, was far more prosperous in 1914 than it ever had been before in human history. Okay? Because, and then 1939, Hitler, even more hysterically, Germany needs living space. The laws of existence require uninterrupted killing so that the better may live. It's all pure nonsense. It's all in his head. Okay? All in their head. And Germany today is smaller than the Third Reich, has a larger population and a vastly higher standard of living. Okay? Didn't gain territory, lost territory. But much higher standard of living because of the advance of science and technology, which is a project that was contributed to by people of every nation, including people that were trying to exterminate. So this was nonsense. And then today, I happen to know, because I have talked to them personally, that there are people in position of very high responsibility in the American national security establishment who believe that war with China is inevitable. Inevitable. Because China's got 4 times the American population. If they all had cars like we do, there wouldn't be enough oil in the world. There isn't enough to go around. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there are people in Beijing in comparable positions looking at this problem from the opposite side of the chessboard and thinking exactly the same thing from the other point of view. And if that position is allowed to prevail, if that conceit is allowed to prevail, it will be war. There's no two ways about it. Okay? Because the only question is, sooner or later, should we? Now, this idea is fundamentally false. Okay? In fact, and the reason why it's false, okay, is not accidental. It's because there's actually no such thing as natural resources. This is only natural raw materials. It is technology, invention, that turns materials into resources. It is resourceful people who turn materials into resources. Okay? And the more resourceful people are, the more resourceful people there are, the more inventions there will be, and the faster the rate that resources will expand. And this is why, actually, if you look at the data, okay, as the world's population has gone up, the per capita living standard has gone up. This has been a continuous trend. Okay? But it doesn't seem to make sense. You would think, along with Malthus, the more people there are, the less there's to go around, not the more there's to go around. Even though historically, it goes. And in fact, some of you here may remember there was an organization called the Club of Rome, which achieved great prominence in 1972 by issuing a report called The Limits to Growth, in which they predicted that we would run out of everything by the year 2000. Because they had assessed the total amount of oil and copper and zinc and this and that that was in the world, and how fast it was being used up, and it was all going to be used up by the year 2000. Okay? And the report received wide acclaim in mainstream media. Everyone's, oh, this is very important report. We must consider their recommendation to stop economic growth and population growth and so forth. And the Chinese actually implemented a one-child policy in response to this, with brutal consequences. But of course, it didn't happen. The year 2000 came and went, and we haven't run out of anything. Okay. But interestingly, around 2005, the Club of Rome held a reunion, and they published the discussion. And what they said was, a lot of people think we were wrong because none of our predictions came true. Okay, there are people who think that, okay, but they're wrong. They don't understand. We were fundamentally right. Yes, our predictions did not come true, but sooner or later they must come true because there's only so much here. And even though that point of view had been shown to be counterfactual, they were still insistent on it. It must be true. And indeed, to most people, it seems to be true. And to show that it's false, it's like trying to prove to someone that there's an infinite number of points inside the line segment. It's counterintuitive that a finite segment can have infinite number of points in it. But anyone can see that a line that goes off to infinity has an infinite number of points.
Right.
Okay, and that's why this is important, that we go into space. To make it clear that it's not true that there's only so much to go around. Because the Earth comes with an infinite scope. And that's the case for space.
NASA has been spending money again on the nuclear thermal propulsion. I think that's a wise expenditure for them to add to the Mars equation.
Well, nuclear thermal, they're not spending a whole lot. Nuclear thermal rockets are useful technology. They allow you to basically double the payload that you could send to Mars from low Earth orbit with a given amount of mass in low Earth orbit. So I think work should be done on that. I do not think that the Mars mission should be held up until nuclear thermal rockets become available. Okay? I think that it is important to be working on advancing space technology, expanding our data tricks. But I don't think we need more advanced propulsion than we currently have to go to Mars. I think we can keep going with what we have now. We can get to Mars right now in 6 months with chemical propulsion. The InSight mission just did. And actually, if I had a nuclear thermal rocket, I would not even try to go faster than that. I would just try to use it to increase the payload. So I think having a certain budget for working on advancing technology so they can be brought into the mix when the time comes is prudent. But I don't think that we have to hold off on going to Mars until we have such things. Other questions? So,
You talked about fusion,
yeah.
cold fusion. Or,
I was talking
is that-
about hot dynamic fusion.
Yeah. I've always wondered, do you ever see a time when cold fusion and warm superconductivity are going to come together and revolutionize things? Do you see?
Well, warm.
What do you think of that?
Okay, I don't know about cold fusion. It looks like that discovery was not real. Okay. But warm, high-temperature superconductivity is real, and it is being used by one of those entrepreneurial fusion companies I talked about. Tokamak Fusion, or Tokamak Energy, is a British company which is developing very high-field tokamak fusion reactors using high-temperature superconducting magnets. So that is a significant advance, and it's going to make a difference. Yes?
Is there another propulsion system, like an ion pulse system, something like that being developed?
Well, okay, there's various electric propulsion systems. Some are actually operational, particularly on small spacecraft. Okay, for instance, the Starlink spacecraft that Elon Musk just launched all use electric propulsion systems for station keeping to prevent their orbits from decaying. These electric propulsion systems typically are very low thrust, so therefore applying velocity changes when there's no rush. The JPL did use electric propulsion on the Dawn spacecraft to go puttering around the asteroid belt. Okay, and electric propulsion systems, imagine a car where you get 1,000 miles to the gallon, but it takes a year to go from 0 to 60. Okay, well, okay, that's what it is, okay? So electric propulsions are not the way we're going to do quick trips to Mars, and people who try to sell electric propulsion that way are untruthful. Electric propulsion, however, is a way that if you have to do a lot of little velocity changes over a long period of time, they're far more efficient than chemical thrusters. Sir?
You mentioned the price per kilogram has been going down significantly. Is that only because of the entrepreneurial efforts, or is the price per kilogram for government efforts also decreasing?
No, it's because of the entrepreneurial efforts. I mean, look, the U.S. government has not introduced a new space launch system since the space shuttle. And it's about to, or thinks it will, or might do the SLS. But the SLS is not going to reduce the cost per payload. Actually, it's higher cost per payload than other launch systems. Nor did the cost of space launch get reduced by various incremental improvements to the Atlas and Delta family that were funded by NASA or the Air Force. What has caused the drop in the cost of space launch is SpaceX with its own money going and developing reusable launch vehicles.
Can I just make a comment about that?
Yeah.
Well, one thing people should understand is that the private sector has a motivation to make profit. Okay, that their motivation is to make profit. Let's do business, let's make money. The government, that's not their motivation. They are not shareholder mentality. They don't have that profit motivation like entrepreneurs do. Am I?
You're correct,
comment
it's,
on that?
yeah, I would. Okay, it all depends. Okay.
I mean, they want to
See,
save money, but
yeah,
they
but-
need to do it.
Let me explain. World War II, the government would go to Boeing and they say, we want to buy 1,000 B-17s. Boeing would say, fine, this is how much they cost each. And the government would say, okay, we'll do it that way. Give us 1,000 B-17s for that price. And Boeing would go and they would produce those things as quickly and as cheaply as they could and pocket the profit. And because the price was fixed, it was their incentive to build them as fast as they could, as cheaply as they could, provided they met all specs, which they did, fine and cheap. And that's how we want to do it. Okay. In the 1960s, however, a number of reformers took a look at this defense industrial complex thing, and they said, look at this, these people make 30% profit on every airplane they sell us. That's unfair. That's ridiculous. The average rate of profit in the economy is 8%. Okay? That's what they should get. So let's change the way we do business. We will have a different kind of contract where 8%. That'll be fair. Because we've had enough of these bandits making off with 30% profits. Well, guess what that did? That reversed the incentives. Because now, the more it cost, the more money they made. And so, you know, when I worked at Martin Marietta, we had 300% overhead rates. Because there was no incentive for management to bring it down. Because we would get direct costs plus overhead and then fee based on overhead and also G&A. And in fact, among us, we had a saying at Martin Marietta, overhead is our most important product. Okay, so here this is. Okay, SLS, this thing's going on for 31 years. Okay. I recently had some discussions with some mathematicians. How can we speed up the SLS program? I said, oh, that's easy. Tell them you're not going to pay them until they deliver it. Okay. Okay. You know, and tell them that what you're going to pay them is this much and no more, no matter how long it takes them to do. It's like having the plumber come to fix the sink. Okay. If you tell them, okay, you're going to do this for $200, fine. It'll be done in an hour. Okay, if you tell them, I'll give you $50 an hour, it'll take 3 days. So it depends on how you structure the deal. Now, Musk insisted on fixed price contracts. He got a lot of resistance from NASA on that. They said, no, we do a cost plus contract. This is how it's done. No, it's not. I want to do it this way. And he stuck to his guns, and eventually they agreed, because the fixed price he was offering them was considerably lower than what anybody else was, in fact, costing them under cost plus contract. Okay? But you know, this is how it works in the free market. Okay, you're not interested. Academically interested, but fundamentally what you're not really interested in how much it costs someone to make something that you use. You wonder how good is it and what does it cost you? Right? And if he cuts his cost in half and lowers your cost by 20% and it's now cheaper than it was before this last year. But it's like, you know, health insurance. Okay? In the past 20 years, every health procedure that is insured, the cost has gone up. And every health procedure that is not insured, the cost has gone down. Overall cost of health insurance has gone way up. The cost of, all these insured procedures has gone up. Cost of LASIK has come down because it's not insured. Okay? So that's how it is. So we need entrepreneurial companies, but yes, fixed price contracting. And then I think it should be fixed price services. If they simply said, okay, in other words, instead of providing an entitlement to some company to develop a lunar lander to do the lunar program, they should say, you want to develop a lunar lander and you even need some help on it. Fine. We will match your cost dollar for dollar. In other words, we're not going to pay for it. Okay? We'll match it dollar for dollar while you're developing it. And if you do develop it by this date, we'll give you at least 5 launches at this rate per launch. So in other words, you don't start making money on this program until it's live. And your incentive is to do it as quickly and as cheaply as possible because we're paying for at least part of the development yourself. Okay? You're not making money on the development program. Okay? You're making money on the flight hardware. Other questions? Going once? In the back.
What's your opinion of the Dream Chaser program?
The Sierra Nevada?
But
Yes, sir.
you know who works there.
Oh, just don't
Well,
That won't matter.
that's also being done under the COTS program, as I understand it.
Pardon?
That's being done under the COTS program, the same program that helped fund the Dragon.
But you gotta define that, so
Yes.
commercial.
Commercial, off the shelf, a commercial,
Oh,
I believe
come
so,
on,
yeah.
somebody knows.
what?
Cost, yeah, commercial off the shelf.
Commercial off the shelf. Okay, it's not really off the shelf. But look, this is a good program. This is exactly how, what I just said, we'll pay half the development and then we'll give you flights once it's developed. That's how Dragon was developed. Okay? And as a result, okay, Dragon has now flown quite a few missions in its cargo mode. It's flown one unmanned mission in the crew capsule mode. It's not yet a proven vehicle. It even had an accident during a test of it. But nevertheless, it did fly to orbit and back. And they've spent about 1/10 on that program that has been spent on the Orion program, which has not even flown yet. So at 1/10 the cost, what? Well, that was done before.
But you're right, yeah, the mission is not.
Okay. So for 1/10 the cost, they've gotten a functioning piece of hardware. Because once again, SpaceX was not making money on the development program. They were partially subsidized on the development program, but they were spending money. They had skin in the game. And the Dream Chaser is the same way. Now, of course, Dream Chaser has not flown yet. When will it fly?
Our ETA flew.
What?
Our engineering test article flew. What was dropped?
Okay. But flown to space?
No,
No.
Sir.
When's that going to happen?
2021 September.
Okay. Well, you guys got to work faster. Okay. But once it does fly, I think it's good that there'll be competitive options for serving that function. Dragons, Dream Chasers, maybe even Orion, maybe the Blue Origin capsule, whatever it's called. Yeah, that's a good thing. Other questions? All right, thanks. Over there, stand by the bus.
But wait, before you go,
Oh,
I forgot to hand out, well, I just want to hand out these.
oh, you also want to do a group photo too.
And the group photo is really fun.
All right, everyone to the front.
We're gonna put
Women
the
and children first.